March 1973, The Tonight Show studio. Muhammad Ali was at the peak of his greatness. He stepped into the frame under deafening applause, and his walk made it clear this was his territory. He was relaxed, joking, shadowboxing, and completely dominating the airwaves. For him, it was just another evening where he was the center of the universe. Meanwhile, Bruce Lee waited backstage. Ali knew who he was, the guy from TV, the Kung Fu master. To the heavyweight champion of the world, he was nothing more than a showman playing at fighting. Ali felt his total superiority and was ready to show it to all of America. The air in the studio was crisp, cooled to perfection to counteract the heat of the massive stage lights, but Ali seemed to radiate a warmth that filled the entire room. He moved with a rhythmic grace that suggested he was hearing music no one else could, a private symphony of success and invulnerability. Every gesture he made, from the casual wave to the sharp, playful flick of a jab toward the camera, was met with roars of approval. The audience didn't just watch him, they inhaled his presence. He sat in the guest chair not as a visitor but as a monarch reclaiming his throne. His suit was sharp, fitting his powerful frame like armor, yet he looked as comfortable as if he were in his own living room. Behind the heavy velvet curtains, the atmosphere was different. Bruce Lee stood in the dim light of the wings, watching the monitor with a focused, quiet intensity. He was small compared to the giant on the screen, dressed in modest attire that lacked the flash and sparkle of the heavyweight king. Ali, glancing briefly toward the curtain during a break in his own banter, dismissed the man waiting there as a mere curiosity. In Ali's world, combat was measured in broken ribs, heavy gloves, and 15 rounds of brutal reality. To him, what Bruce Lee practiced was an ornamental dance, a stylized pantheon of movements that looked good on a cinema screen but carried no weight in the harsh light of a real ring. Ali leaned back, his legs crossed, his voice booming over the laughter of the crowd. He commanded the narrative, steering the conversation with the same precision he used to steer his opponents into the corners of the ring. He was the most recognizable face on the planet, a man who had stared down the toughest hitters in history and come out smiling. The idea that a martial artist could offer anything comparable to the raw power of boxing seemed like a joke to him. He was prepared to treat the upcoming segment as a lighthearted comedy, an opportunity to reinforce his status as the only true warrior in the building. As the stage manager signaled the end of the monologue and the transition to the next guest, Ali tightened his grip on the moment, ready to turn his charismatic light onto the man about to enter his world. Bruce Lee walked into the studio. Ali demonstratively did not change his posture. When Bruce extended his hand for a handshake, Ali made a move that shocked 20 million viewers. He simply sat there with his arms crossed, looking right through him. This was no accident. It was a conscious humiliation. The studio froze in awkwardness. Ali began his show. He openly mocked martial arts, calling them acting and dancing for the cameras. He crushed with his authority, declaring that only boxing was reality, while Bruce was just a pretty picture. Ali enjoyed his role as the aggressor until he noticed that Bruce was suspiciously calm. The silence in the room became heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the audience. Ali leaned back further into his chair, his physical presence expanding to occupy as much space as possible. He looked toward the host and then back at the man standing before him, his eyes filled with a playful yet biting disdain. Every time the host tried to bridge the gap with a question, Ali intercepted it, turning the conversation back to the perceived futility of Eastern fighting styles. He spoke with the rhythm of a man used to getting the last word, his voice carrying a sharp edge that dismissed years of tradition and discipline as mere choreography. He gestured toward Bruce with a flick of his wrist, implying that the muscle and bone of a real fighter would always shatter the illusions of a movie set. The heavyweight champion was a master of psychological warfare, and he used every tool in his arsenal to make the smaller man appear insignificant. He laughed loudly at the idea of self-defense techniques that did not involve a ring or a referee, painting a picture of combat that only had room for the world he inhabited. For Ali, this was a performance meant to solidify his status as the ultimate warrior, a way to remind the public that there was a vast gulf between a star and a champion. He watched the red light of the cameras, knowing that every household in America was witnessing this one-sided dominance. He expected a reaction, a flicker of anger, or a slumped posture of defeat from the man in the second chair. Instead, Ali found himself staring into a face that was as still as a mountain lake. Bruce did not pull his hand back in shame. He lowered it with a deliberate, slow grace that showed no sign of agitation. He sat down in the chair next to Ali, adjusting his position with a quiet confidence that seemed to absorb Ali's verbal blows without being moved by them. The champion's taunts began to feel like stones thrown into an abyss, disappearing without an echo. Ali's smile, usually so infectious and bright, started to feel forced as he realized his opponent was not playing the role of the victim. The energy in the studio shifted from the predictable thrill of a bully at work to the unsettling tension of a hunter, realizing he might have misjudged his prey. Ali's chest rose and fell with a newfound irritation, his eyes narrowing as he searched for a crack in the stillness of the man beside him. The more Ali pushed, the more the void of Bruce's silence seemed to pull the air out of the room, leaving the champion standing on a stage that was slowly becoming less certain. The tension reached its peak when Bruce asked one direct question. "Why did you not shake my hand?" Ali tried to joke it off, shifting back to the topic of real fighters and movie stars, but Bruce did not back down. He spoke words that hit Ali harder than any hook from Joe Frazier. "You are just afraid." At that moment, the mask of the greatest showman slipped. A dead silence fell over the studio. The whole world saw not the champion, but a man whose ego had just been exposed for all to see. Ali was in a rage, ready to jump up, but he realized that physical force was powerless here. The silence grew so thick it felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Ali's eyes, usually dancing with mischief or fire, became fixed and glassy, reflecting a sudden, piercing vulnerability. He sat paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the accusation, his large hands gripping the armrests of the guest chair until his knuckles turned white. For years, he had been the one to dictate the psychological pace of every encounter, using his wit and his mouth to dismantle the confidence of giants. Yet here he was, being dismantled by a quiet sentence from a man he had tried to diminish. The audience, which had been laughing and cheering only moments before, was now a sea of frozen faces, caught in the crossfire of a confrontation that had transcended entertainment. Ali felt a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the studio lights. It was the burning sting of a truth he had not been prepared to face on national television. Every time he had mocked the martial arts earlier in the evening, he had been building a wall, a barrier of noise and arrogance to protect the purity of his own legacy. Now, that wall had been breached. He looked at the man sitting next to him and saw no malice, only an unwavering clarity that made Ali feel transparent. The champion's mouth opened as if to unleash a torrent of his famous rhymes, but the words died in his throat. He realized that to shout now would only prove the point. To react with violence would be a confession of the very fear Bruce had named. He remained anchored to his seat, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts as he struggled to regain control over his own narrative. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every second of his hesitation, broadcasting the fracture in his invincibility to millions of homes. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the host seemed to vanish into the background, leaving only the two men in an arena of silence. Ali's mind raced through his past victories, searching for the swagger that usually came so naturally, but he found only the hollow echo of his own excuses. He was the king of the world. Yet in this frozen moment, he felt like a subject being judged by a higher law of character. The rage in his soul began to curdle into a cold, heavy realization that his greatest opponent was not the man in the chair, but the reflection Bruce was holding up for him to see. Ali stood up and loomed over Bruce, demonstrating the huge difference in dimensions. This was the moment of truth. Bruce did not move from his spot and refused to accept the handshake offered as a gesture of dominance. He demanded sincerity. In this short span of time, a shift occurred in Ali's head. He saw before him a man who was not afraid of his titles or his anger. It dawned on Ali. His refusal of the handshake had not been a manifestation of strength, but a defensive reaction. He realized that his arrogance was only a way to hide fear of something new and incomprehensible. For the first time in a long while, Ali felt respect for the one he had considered a nobody just a minute ago. The physical space between them seemed to vibrate with the sheer mass of Ali's presence, yet the expected intimidation failed to take root. As Ali looked down, he expected to see a man shrinking under the shadow of a heavyweight king, but instead, he found an unwavering gaze that stripped away the artifice of his public persona. The champion's towering height, usually his greatest psychological weapon, suddenly felt like a clumsy burden in the face of such absolute composure. He stood there with his hand extended like a weapon, a cold offering meant to force a submissive response. But the lack of movement from the man below him acted as a mirror. In that reflection, Ali saw the hollowness of his own aggression. He saw a man who had fought the most dangerous punchers in the world but was currently losing a battle of wills to a seated stranger who refused to play by the rules of ego. The noise of the studio audience became a distant hum as Ali's internal world began to reorganize. The realization hit him with a clarity more painful than any physical blow. He had used his fame and his size as a shield against the unknown. He had mocked the martial arts not because he found them weak, but because he did not understand them. And that lack of understanding had made him feel vulnerable for the first time since he had first laced up a pair of gloves. The man sitting before him possessed a different kind of power, one that did not require a ring, a referee, or a cheering crowd to validate it. It was a self-contained strength that Ali realized he had been lacking in his frantic quest to remain the center of attention. He watched the steady rise and fall of Bruce's chest and felt his own heart rate begin to slow in synchronization. The anger that had fueled his performance moments ago evaporated, leaving behind a raw, honest appreciation for the courage it took to stand up to the greatest athlete on the planet without raising a fist. Ali understood then that true mastery was not just about the ability to destroy, but the discipline to remain centered when the world tried to throw you off balance. The small man in the chair had become a giant in Ali's eyes. The contempt that had clouded his judgment for the last hour vanished, replaced by a profound recognition of a fellow warrior. Ali felt the weight of his own hubris falling away, making room for a connection that went deeper than sport or entertainment. He looked at his own hand, still hovering in the air, and saw it for what it truly was, a barrier he had built himself, which he now felt a desperate need to tear down. Ali did what no one expected of him. He lowered his arms, admitted he was wrong, and extended his hand again, this time for real. The sincere handshake blew up the hall. For the remainder of the show, these were no longer two competitors, but two masters who had found a common language. Backstage, Ali found Bruce to personally apologize without the cameras. He admitted that this little Chinese guy had taught him a lesson in courage that he had never been given in the ring. The story ends with footage of their burgeoning friendship. Ali realized, a true champion is not the one who defeated everyone, but the one who was able to defeat his own ego. The transition from hostility to brotherhood happened in a heartbeat, yet it felt like the culmination of a lifetime of training for both men. As they sat back down, the atmosphere in the studio transformed from a pressurized chamber of conflict into a masterclass of mutual admiration. Ali shifted his focus, setting aside his rehearsed taunts and instead leaning in with genuine curiosity to learn about the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do. The audience watched in awe as the heavyweight king, a man known for his unbreakable pride, listened with the humility of a student. He asked questions about rhythm, about the economy of movement, and about the mental discipline required to face an opponent twice one's size without a moment of hesitation. Bruce met this new energy with a graciousness that proved he had never sought a fight, only the basic dignity of being seen as an equal. The lights of the stage eventually dimmed, but the connection remained unbroken as they moved into the quiet corridors behind the scenes. Ali sought Bruce out in the hallway, far from the prying eyes of the press and the roar of the crowd. In that private space, the champion discarded the last remnants of his theatrical persona. He looked at the man who had stood his ground on national television and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that Bruce had offered him a rare gift, the opportunity to be a human being rather than a monument. They walked together toward the exit, their strides matching, two icons who had walked through the fire of public confrontation to find a rare and silent understanding. Years later, the memory of that night remained a cornerstone of Ali's legacy. He often reflected on the moment he almost let his pride blind him to the greatness of another. He understood that his encounter with Bruce had changed his definition of strength forever. It was no longer just about the power of his fists or the speed of his feet, but about the elasticity of his soul and the ability to acknowledge a mistake. The image of their shared laughter and their collaborative training sessions became a symbol of a world where different paths led to the same peak. Ali carried that lesson into every future battle, knowing that his greatest victory had not occurred under the bright lights of a championship ring, but in the quiet moment when he chose to lower his guard and open his heart to a man he had once tried to ignore.